that you'd want to have in a consulting firm in the BFS space, the combined entity was stronger than the independent entities. So I think as a result of that, the organization is stronger together, and the combined capabilities from a full scale perspective. So if you look at Virtusa, pre-acquisition, it was more focused purely in the retail banking space. Post-acquisition, I think Polaris brought skill sets in areas like asset and wealth management that Virtusa had relationships, but not, let's say, the depth of those relationships in that space.
Right. Okay, it'll be helpful for us to just understand what are the sort of independent capabilities or how they're perceived. I understand that obviously Polaris comes from a more investment or asset wealth management kind of background, which is also serving more retail banking. But are there, and that's just client portfolio, but in terms of the nature of their work, what they're doing, do they bring different technical capabilities?
Yes and no. I mean, if you look at Polaris, right? So Polaris also had a product division which built core banking systems. So the knowledge of that kind of architecture, application, rationalization, and development side was not something that Virtusa brought. But then at the same time, Virtusa brought really that kind of platforming heritage. So if you look at how Virtusa grew up, and this is, again, publicly available information, but they started working with a number of independent software vendors and really made a name for themselves as kind of that platforming-based approach and the good old-fashioned build once, push it across the enterprise methodology. And I think looking at how both of those firms grew up, the complementary skill sets, there were certainly groups that did similar things, but in terms of how the integration occurred, they ended up just merging the groups. So, for example, if you had one group that was doing Java development in Section A and another group that was doing Java development in Section B, between Virtusa and Polaris, now they were just one Java practice going forward. And and as a result of the merger, obviously you had to kind of bring leadership teams together and practice structures. I would say from a Polaris standpoint, there wasn't as deep of a practice structure as there was at Virtusa. And I think that was one thing that helped really from a merger standpoint. And if I look at kind of bringing in very niche skill sets like mobile, if you will, there were practices on both sides of the fence, but ultimately the kind of breadth and depth of the practice structure at Virtusa was slightly more advanced than what was at Polaris at the time.
Got it.
And as a result, they kind of folded in nicely from that standpoint.
Got it. But when you look at their practice, there's insurance, there's healthcare, whatever the different categories. Has Polaris been able to contribute to those efforts, because they're kind of viewed as just these banking FI expert guys, right? Like, has Polaris's capabilities been leveraged in other industries by Virtusa?
They have. I mean, they did have relationships in manufacturing, in some small areas like CPG, and to be honest with you, that's another space that Virtusa had really played in heavily. I would say though that if I look at the lion's share of the contribution, it'd probably be 80% weighted towards BFS cluster and then a smattering of a number of industries. So covering areas like comms and media to like the areas like CPG and manufacturing, like I mentioned as well. So BFS was clearly the focal point, and still is, I think, from an organizational standpoint. But if you look at the whole, there were logos across both sides of the house that either firm did not have that the other did. So they brought in those relationships, if you will.
Got it. So you're saying CPG work is something that Virtusa never did before, and Polaris had a foothold or a few accounts there?
No, Virtusa did CPG, but I would say in areas like APAC, there was less of a focal point in that area, and there were clients that were Polaris only that they brought in that space.
Oh, okay.
Again, I'm probably skirting pretty close to the line. So.
Yeah, I got it there. I won't detail it further. The other thing I wanted to understand is, so Virtusa has this sort of reputation of being like a really strong engineering background kind of firm, right? I just want to understand what are their sort of, the platforms that they've developed over time. What are their platform offerings, and what's the depth and breadth of those